is kind of fun because you always pick stuff I don't think about, but you wanted to talk about top horror games, which at first I was like, what games am I even going to pick? Does Ghostbusters count as a horror game? Because I wasn't a big horror gaming person, but I thought back, I go, what are the first games that come to mind? And a few did, some pretty obscure ones too.
Well, maybe we should probably put more thought into this, but not just horror games, but even just like spooky games and games that are kind of like, you know, Halloweenish. For example, this didn't make my list, but it almost did until I started thinking of some other ones. But for instance, Quest for Glory. Like, you don't think of that as a horror game or a spooky game, but there are elements in that game that are pretty spooky, like the part, you know, with the Baba Yaga hut, prince that turns into a bear, and you go to the, you know, at night you can run around. There's like spirits that come around in the graveyard, you know, like that kind of thing. Certainly, you know, Ghostbusters and those kind of games, I think, would be considered a Halloween type game.
Go ahead and throw out your first one. I'm curious if we overlap on any. I don't think we're going to.
But for my number 5 was The Suffering. Do you remember that game?
Was that on Xbox or was that before that?
It could have been. I played it on PC.
Okay.
It was really in that time where, you know, a lot of the PC games and the console games started to come together, like maybe Xbox kind of era. Yeah, so The Suffering, it was this game where you're like a criminal who gets sent to jail, prison, and all this weird stuff starts happening. Like the prison's haunted, and there's also like an outside opponent or component where like you supposedly have killed your wife. And I think depending on the decisions you make in the game, kind of decide on whether you actually killed your wife or if you were innocent. So like throughout the game, you can kind of help other inmates or do certain things, and that kind of, it's like a morality system. But just the whole atmosphere and a cool, fun game to play, you know, that had a lot of kind of spooky elements and things too, and the environment and things. So I'm going with The Suffering for my number 5.
Now, as soon as you mentioned your first one, 2 other games I didn't even think about popped into my head. So I may have to modify my list a bit on the fly. Because my number 5, it kind of had to make a list because everything I try and do here, I try and think about what it has a memory for some specific reason to me, even if it was just, wow, this game was amazing. My number 5 was the original Maniac Mansion. And I think we've talked before, and you said you've never played that one.
Yeah, I haven't played
that one.
But
that was one of the original LucasArts games when it started to be more like point and click, the interface we're used to with the text and the verbs on the bottom. And that game was so unique because you're trapped in a comical, goofy household of a cross between like People from the Hills Have Eyes and the Monsters TV show. You could pick different characters you wanted to be, and how they would interact with the puzzles would be different. It had so much replayability. But even though it was comical and goofy, there was always a sense of dread when you open a door you hadn't been in yet. Was there going to be somebody behind there to capture you? What was the next thing you were going to run into? And it had a kind of spooky feel when you're uncovering like nuclear waste containers when you drain the pool. And funny, but spooky, goofy in a way.
So my number 4, and I want to talk about this first real quick. So, you know, we talk about horror games and spooky games and stuff, and I always thought, you know, there's 2 kind of distinct versions of like horror, right? You got their kind of in your face, you're running through the forest and there's a guy with a chainsaw chasing you, Friday the 13th kind of style. And then you got that kind of more subtle horror where it's more atmospheric. So it's like maybe you're walking through the forest and you see a cabin, and you look in the cabin's window and there's a woman getting undressed. You're like, oh, hey. And then all of a sudden she like zips her skin off and pulls it off, and there's like some kind of crazy creature underneath, and you're like, whoa, you know.
Yeah,
that's the kind of stuff that I like, that kind of more atmospheric, you know. One of the games I really liked is an older game. It was called The Thing. It was based off
yeah
This game was really cool. It kind of took place after the movie. So you're like the military, and you know, you go to the station and you have to go through and, you know, figure out what the hell happened over here. And it's cool because like you have these NPCs that kind of follow you around that you can collect, but you don't know if one of them's the Thing. And so like certain parts in the game, like they might turn on you and you have this big fight on your hands and stuff like that. So it's always kind of like you're like throughout the whole it was one of those type of games that was really just fun to play and kind of kept you on your toes. I really liked that game.
So back on the Commodore 64, I know you weren't gaming back then at all. I think came on like a compilation disc. Back then you get like 25 great games for your Commodore 64. It's like the classic shovelware before we knew what shovelware was. So there was Friday the 13th on the disc. The game, of course, like a lot of games back then, when we look back on it, it was absolute garbage because you were just one of the camp counselors and you had your 8 friends. Maybe you were all the friends, maybe you're all the counselors. It didn't matter because this literally seems like it was some kind of random horror game that they said, oh, we can get a cheap version of the Friday the 13th license on this. There's 2 things that stick out with it. One is the music in the game. There's no Friday the 13th theme whatsoever. It literally uses public domain music like the Wedding March. It literally plays the Teddy Bear's Picnic. This scream that comes out of nowhere when you kill somebody. You're playing that game as a kid, and that terrifying, horrible screech of a scream comes on, and it's always accompanied by like bloody skulls, a head in the guy's axe, all in glorious 8-bit Commodore technology. It stuck in my head. The whole point of the game was you needed to take a cross and put it in a room and get all the counselors or friends to go into that room so Jason couldn't kill them. But the thing is, you're like, where is Jason? Where is Jason? And the whole game, you never see Jason. It turns out Jason is just a character disguised as one of the camp counselors. So the overall trick to the game is if you're just playing to beat the game and don't care about scores, you just take an axe or a weapon and you run around hacking all the counselors until Jason appears and you kill Jason and you win the game. Somehow that scream became like addicting to hear, which is kind of creepy in its own right.
So my number 3, Dead Space. Did you ever play Dead Space?
Yeah, I did play Dead Space and I actually enjoyed it, and I kind of wanted to play the remake, and I haven't yet.
I haven't played the remake. That original one was a great game. Like just the atmosphere. There's like one part of the station and you hear like whispering and stuff going on and like the headphones, almost like there's like a haunted piece of it. I mean, it was just so cool and so atmospheric. Like every time you would go down the corridor, you're like, oh crap, one of these things is gonna come at me, because you didn't have a lot of ammo and you had to hit them in the right spot. It was just like each encounter was just like, oh my god. It's been so long since I played it. I just remember how freaking like atmospheric it was.
Our Resident Evil story, Mr. Asshole over there, he remembers this, but it was like I came over to your house and you wanted to show me this new game, Resident Evil, like this survival horror was a genre that didn't really exist. I was playing it and you go in the house, go on this hallway, and I'm looking around and it's quiet. This fucker was slowly cranking up the volume because he knew down the hallway that first jump scare where the 2 devil dogs or demon dogs or whatever they are launched through the window. I just remember like jumping and throwing the controller, and you're over there laughing and have a damn good time. And I'm not sure if I ever picked up Resident Evil 1 again since then. My number 3 is the original Dead Rising for the Xbox 360. And I shall also preface this all by saying the zombie genre is my number 1 favorite of all of them. So Dead Rising, you're Frank West, the photographer. It's like you're trapped in the shopping mall. The zombies break in, and there's people you have to rescue and try and get them to safety. You can actually craft your own weapons, right? Within limitation. You could customize the outfit you were wearing, which is basically cosmetic. But you could run around in a giant like Mega Man head with a dress on with a chainsaw, and like you're tearing through zombies and you're trying to rescue people. You're trying to survive until the helicopter comes and rescues you. You could also stop and take photos of the zombies, and you would get points that help you level up depending on the types of categories you captured them in. There was actually an erotic category. You had to think ahead. You couldn't just carry 6 shotguns, a baseball bat with barbed wire, a flamethrower, and you only had limited capacity. And the later games kind of changed that. So you could just basically carry a whole arsenal, and it takes some of that. I've gone this far. Should I go back and restock, or should I push a bit further and see what's there? And it kind of gave you that fun. Plus the fact you could hop on a lawnmower with blades and just mow down zombies out on the parking lot lawn. All right, we're moving through this. What's next for you?
This is kind of, I think, for most people, a kind of a sleeper game, because I don't think a lot of people knew about it, but maybe I'm wrong. But Condemned Criminal Origins. That game was probably one of the most unique games I've played. It's really good. You're this investigator who's investigating this like serial murderer, and there's all these different elements to it. So like you go to the crime scene and you have to use, like, you got your camera, different tools to try to create, just to see what the evidence is and piece it together and stuff like that. As it goes on, you get framed for the murder of your these police officers. And there's also something weird going on within the city where, like, the homeless population are starting to go crazy and attack people. The fighting system in that game is basically melee. It's so much fun. It's probably one of the funnest kind of fighting systems that I remember. A lot of fun, very kind of, you had like the spooky elements and the horror elements, and it had like a supernatural element to it and stuff. It was a cool game.
So this game stuck in my mind, but unfortunately, my memory, I remember snapshots of it. The darkness, a guy who's gotten possessed. So you use both the powers of your normal weapons and the power of the darkness, which can be like tentacles that reach out around walls to kill people. Did you know who did his voice in the games?
Mike Patton.
You are nothing but my puppet.
Mike Patton. Because do you know the game, or you just remember this? You looked it up.
Oh, I know it. Yeah, no, I know it.
That is a game that when I thought about it, I kind of would go back and play the first one again, just because I remember a few sections of the game. My mind is like a Polaroid camera, to be nostalgic, right? Holidays, games, special events. I have like a little photo album of things that happened I see. I don't remember entire sequences of events. I remember enjoying the hell out of this game and the way the kills were, and it's almost like he was like kind of like a Venom character, right? Like he could morph out of his body. And it was so psychological, like knowing he was going to die, but he still had to go ahead and do what was going to be forced to do by the darkness. And it's an older game. It's never been remade, but that's one I definitely say people should check out, at least the first one.
The games that for me were the ones where you played them and you're like, you don't want to play them at night. Like, they literally make you like, I don't want to go through this door because there's something that's going to happen. And for me, that was Silent Hill.
I thought you might have Silent Hill on there.
Hill, right? Silent Hill was just such an incredible game. I remember playing this on the PlayStation 1, and just it blew my mind. There's so many parts of that game that just like freak you out, because like half the time you can't see what's going on. The way the game works is you have this radio, and when enemies are coming, like the radio starts giving off static and like making noise. It's like, and so like you're in this area and this radio starts going off and you're like, oh my God, like where is this thing? You can't see it. I remember there's one part where you're in, I think it's in the school. There's these like little ghosts kind of creatures, and you can't really see them unless you're like light. I think it's shining directly on them. And they don't, if I remember correctly, they don't do anything except set your radio off. But it freaks you out because you're like, where's, this thing going to get me? And you can't see it. You don't know where it's at. You just know your radio's going off. Especially for the PS1 and the technology that they had. Also, I think the full motion video for that game was pretty ahead of its time. Like if you go back and watch it now, it looks kind of crappy. But it was actually really cool back then.
I kind of knew you'd have Silent Hill on there. I actually thought you'd have Alan Wake.
Dude, it's so, well, you know what? The reason why I didn't pick Alan Wake, I was trying to think of more older games. So yeah, Alan Wake definitely. I totally forgot about Alan Wake, which is funny because I just got done playing the Alan Wake 2 expansion.
I tried to pick things that have some kind of memory or they stuck with me for a reason. Yeah, Ghouls and Ghosts is hard. Ghosts and Goblins is hard. I remember Castlevania 2. It's a terrible night to have a curse. Like I remember those things about it. But one that stuck with me probably a lot was on the GameCube. I know you didn't play it yet. I don't think you did. But was Eternal Darkness. The first thing about Eternal Darkness was that it was fascinating to have. This was on a Nintendo system, right? Nintendo that's always so stringent about like not so much the violence and the gore, but the subject matter. This was definitely a very supernatural, spooky game. And again, I have not played this game since it came out. So we're talking 20 plus years. You're basically playing through different timelines of different characters who are all trying to find an artifact, and they're all basically in the end cursed. They all do not survive. You have a built-in sanity meter in the game. So the more you get hit or affected by certain elements, the game would start to do weird things for you. And it was very clever for the time because it would actually simulate the game crashing. The volume would start to get lower and lower. And remember how in the old days, the TVs had the little green bars, like your volume was going up and down? It would simulate that. The idea was screwing with the player on a fourth dimension wall sometimes. Now, sometimes you'd walk into a room and you'd start to shrink, or you go to shoot an enemy, it's coming at you, and you pull the trigger and the gun backfires and blows your own head off. And then you hear like a laugh and the screen goes black and it comes back into the screen as normal. And it really fooled me a couple of times thinking the game was screwed up. And if you were going to remake the game, they shouldn't remaster it, they should remake it. And they should play into modern hardware and new things. I'm not sure what you would do or how by surprise it would take anybody nowadays, but I love the fourth wall breaking things that it would do. Make you think your save game was corrupted. Sure enough, more than twice it got me thinking. I go, oh, what? Oh, wait a minute. That was that stupid sanity meter got me again. Eternal Darkness, for some reason, it's almost like it's been lost to time, and it's a cult classic, but it is a excellent game, and I think it would hold up today, most definitely.